Littlefinger, like most characters in the later seasons, was utterly demolished by David and Dan's incompetent writing. So for this video, I want to try my best to fix his character, and to give him a much better resolution, instead of the abysmal train wreck of an ending he got in Season 7. The first thing we need to do is assess what made Littlefinger so great to begin with, so we can better understand why he was lacking in the later seasons. And to me, by far Littlefinger's best aspect is that he plays into one of the show's strengths, which is the rich mystery of conspiracy. Littlefinger's deceptive usage of scheming and backstabbing is so alluring because he entangles characters in a thick mud of conflict that drowns them. To me, it's more intriguing than something like dueling because there's an air of unpredictability as to what Littlefinger will do. We understand his motives, but the actions he takes to fulfill them is always captivating to watch unravel. This is exemplified the most in Season 1, where Littlefinger quite literally kickstarts the entire conflict of the series. Without Littlefinger, there really wouldn't be a show because, think about it, Littlefinger simultaneously manipulates Lysa Arryn to poison her husband Jon Arryn, which in turn brings the Starks into the fold, and he hires an assassin to kill Bran, under the guise that it was the Lannisters who did it. Littlefinger flat out orchestrates an entire war in the realm, so that he can profit by helping each side. I feel like by that alone, Littlefinger is the most evil character in the entire show, and most people normally point to Ramsay or Joffrey. The sheer impact that this character has is arguably the biggest, right behind Dany's Mad Queen arc and the Night King. You can argue that other villains like Tywin and Joffrey are more deadly, but they were spurred into doing heinous actions because of Littlefinger. Like the Red Wedding and Tywin destroying the Riverlands wouldn't be a thing without Peter. What they did in the show comes nowhere near as close to the massive amount of damage that Littlefinger has done to Westeros. He is the mastermind of most major events, and he's the one that's paving the way for this engrossing conflict. I'm not gonna go very in-depth about what makes Littlefinger so great, since this video after all is about fixing him, and not analyzing his greatness. But to put simply, he has a large impact, the very nature of his character is very mysterious and alluring, and the way in which he overcomes his enemies and furthers his position is fueled with high intelligence, making every scene he's in very entertaining, and you're constantly excited to see what he's up to. Now, in the later seasons, all of these aspects about Littlefinger are severely downgraded. Myself and other channels have been pretty vocal about Littlefinger's handling in the later seasons, but I feel like I've seen a common sentiment that Littlefinger was only ruined in his final season, which I completely disagree with. Or some people have even argued that his ending was actually fine. So for this section of the video, we're going to identify where everything went wrong with Littlefinger and how he was downgraded so much, so I can then propose fixes to these problems. Funnily enough, the most pressing issue isn't actually Littlefinger's death, but the exact moment in which he betrays Sansa by handing her over to the Boltons. There's a lot to dive into here, and first let's try to understand Littlefinger's plan for Season 5 because it's very confounding. So Littlefinger, in an attempt to ally himself with the Boltons, gives Sansa over to them, and he does this because he's betting that Stannis will win and liberate Winterfell. His reasoning for giving Sansa over is that, since she'll be at Winterfell already, Stannis will then make her Warden of the North. However, that immediately doesn't make sense and is an extremely convoluted way to become Warden of the North. Instead, he could simply ally the Vale with Stannis, and in exchange for helping, Sansa becomes Warden of the North. However, this isn't actually Littlefinger's plan, because he then gets summoned to talk to Cersei and hatches an alternate plot with her. There, he pitches a plan where he wants Cersei to send an army of Lannisters to attack Stannis' army after they win while they're recovering. She says no for obvious reasons, and Littlefinger also proposes himself to attack with the Vale, and in return, he wants to become Warden of the North. Although Cersei then says that she wants Sansa's head, so I guess that immediately invalidates this entire pitch, because I assume Littlefinger is lying when he says yes. Given that he's in love with Sansa, or maybe he's even lying about that, I don't even know anymore. I'd make the case that he does love Sansa, and that kind of aspect about his character is truly his constant. But after this point, Littlefinger literally disappears from the remainder of Season 5. This scene happens during episode 6, by the way. So Littlefinger is MIA for a long time, and I presume that he had no intentions of sending the Vale to Winterfell, since that would be a major commitment, and he'd have to be nearby to actually attack Stannis after he won, along with him probably alienating the entirety of the North by doing that. So yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, from how devoid of logic and unnecessarily complicated this entire plan is. Addressing the scene with Cersei first, I assume Littlefinger was shooting for a Hail Mary scenario in which the Lannisters would take out the victor, and and establish him as Warden of the North or something. However, that would compromise Sansa, so that wouldn't make any sense. This now makes me think that this entire scene was just Littlefinger lying to Cersei to appease her, and if that was the case, then that was unnecessary. Cersei is eventually going to figure out that Littlefinger is working against her, so he may as well just ignore Cersei and accept her as an enemy. Why bother going all the way down to King's Landing from Winterfell just to lie to her and gain practically nothing? On top of the fact that Littlefinger publicly gave Sansa to the Boltons at Winterfell, so there's a risk in him going to King's Landing because of a possibility that Cersei was informed about that. Like she coincidentally summons him right after he shows up in Winterfell with Sansa. I wonder what she would want to talk about. So this entire scene with Cersei feels pointless, especially since the setup leads absolutely nowhere, along with it making Littlefinger's plan very confusing.
He's doing something completely unexpected, something that has a sense of motivation behind it, but there's no way to tell what his real motivation is until you get to the end of the scene and you realize his real motivation is what Littlefinger's motivation always is, which is furthering the naked self-interest of Littlefinger.
Now, let's go back to Littlefinger giving Sansa to the Boltons and assume that his initial plan was betting on Stannis to win and to establish Sansa as Warden of the North. Like before, there's a much better plan available that achieves the same goal in allying with Stannis, which doesn't alienate Sansa. That just seems like the most logical approach to the situation. Instead, Littlefinger throws away that which he loves the most to the Boltons. In Season 6, Littlefinger claims that he didn't know that Ramsay would be that unhinged, and goes the route of ignorance.
I made a mistake. A horrible mistake. I underestimated a stranger.
Like, he's not lying, and he genuinely didn't know anything about Ramsay.
I've heard very little about you, which makes you quite a rare thing, as lords go.
However, Littlefinger as a character prides himself on being extremely well informed, and would never act on a plan if there was a variable that was a major question mark to him. As an example, Littlefinger flat out kills Dantas Hollard because he didn't trust him to keep his mouth shut. Since his future allegiance was a question mark, he decided that killing him would be a permanent solution to that problem. So giving Sansa away to an unknown figure who's the son of a ruthless father who massacred her entire family is absolutely wild. I feel like it would be safe to assume that Ramsay would at least be somewhat like his father, and if not even crazier. Although it does seem like Roose Bolton is mostly well-mannered, but my point still stands.
His father frightens me.
He should. He's a dangerous man.
You've never asked me about your mother. She was the miller's wife. Apparently they'd married without my knowledge or consent. So I had him hanged, and I took her beneath the tree where he was swaying. She fought me the whole time. She was lucky I didn't hang her too.
In the world of Game of Thrones with so many crazy lords, it's inherently a huge gamble to give Sansa away to a random lord within a house that is notorious for flaying people, I might add. That's by far the most ridiculous thing that Littlefinger does that immediately compromises his character. Littlefinger's extremely convoluted and nonsensical plan for this season is like trying to navigate a complex web of hardened cum. It feels like it was made by someone who doesn't understand the character at all because it reeks of stupidity. It's very clear that David and Dan were trying to imitate what Littlefinger would act like, given that they ran out of source material for him. From here, we have Season 6, which essentially downgrades Littlefinger's presence in the show. It mostly feels like David and Dan gave up doing anything with the character, and pretty much relegated him to trying to appease Sansa for all of Season 6. Because rightfully so, his actions in Season 5 were baffling. And not in a way that you can understand the fault, but in a contrived way in which David and Dan bent the character into a direction that made him very dumb. This leads to Season 7 where, yet again, Littlefinger has a completely batshit insane plan of trying to get Sansa to kill Arya. Now, Littlefinger is a character that naturally has to take great risks to further his position, like orchestrating the entire conflict in Season 1 and conspiring to kill Joffrey. However, the difference between those two examples and his Season 7 plot is that they are much more calculated and safe. He only conspires with people he trusts to stay quiet, and his plans are normally airtight. In Season 7, he's basically trying to convince Sansa that Arya wants to kill her and become Lady of Winterfell, which this is insane for a couple reasons. Firstly, and most importantly, Arya notoriously did not want to be a lady, and she wanted to be a warrior. This was very out in the open, and Sansa even hated her for that, in which Arya would be more like a lady, since Arya's more rambunctious personality would oftentimes compromise Sansa's happiness. I started reading the books recently, and they go much more in depth about this, while the show partially shows this. Sansa should immediately understand Arya's core wants in life, and realize that Littlefinger's claim that she wants to be Lady of Winterfell is bullshit. I know people can change in life, but Arya is still very much a warrior, and if Sansa was really suspicious of this, she could simply talk to her sister and try to determine what her goals are, instead of taking Littlefinger's advice, someone she knows she can't trust. Another issue that doesn't directly involve Littlefinger as a character is the contrivance of this conflict. David and Dan essentially bend Arya's character into being unrealistically cold and crazy towards her sister when that shouldn't be the case. Like, Arya gets really mad at Sansa for writing a letter to Robb to bend the knee to Joffrey, but she was literally held prisoner and forced to do that. Even Robb and his council immediately identified the letter as being bullshit, and for some reason Arya goes crazy about this, as if Sansa betrayed her house and this piece of information will destroy everything when it shouldn't. She even goes as far to act like she's about to kill her sister. I feel like this is just an obvious example of David and Dan exaggerating the amount of anger Arya would feel here to create a false sense of conflict. Not even mentioning the fact that Sansa could literally go to Bran for counsel about this since he told her he knows everything. Or Bran being the one to go to his sisters and telling them about Littlefinger's conspiracies that he literally confirms to Littlefinger's face. The fact that Littlefinger just brushes off the notion that Bran knows about his secret conversation with Varys is hilarious. Bran is clearly indicating to Littlefinger that he knows what he's done in the past, but Littlefinger, for whatever reason, is completely unfazed by this and carries on with his ridiculous plan. These are the reasons why Littlefinger was ruined, and people generally focus solely on his death scene as being dumb, but in reality, it's everything that leads up to this point. Littlefinger's terrible and ruined fate was fully sealed by this point, and his death essentially evokes no emotion from how ruined he was. From here, I'm going to go into two parts in trying to fix his character. The first one being fixing everything within seasons 5 through 7, and the second part will be pitching an alternative path for the character that would make more sense and would better suit him. So tackling the season 5 debacle of giving Sansa away to the Boltons, I think the most simple change would be to be more faithful to the books. In the books, there's a character that is friends with Sansa named Jean Poole that the Lannisters send claiming she's Arya Stark. In the show, Littlefinger can do this, and they could simply say he had her stashed away in his whorehouse and has been working there. Most of the people currently occupying Winterfell don't know what Arya looks like, so it's actually a good plan. And even if Jean is questioned about anything, she would know the answers given her close relationship with Sansa. The only people that would know her true identity would maybe be some Stark loyalists and Theon Greyjoy. Which, I think this would make an interesting dynamic in Theon trying to keep the identity of Jean Poole a secret, essentially adding a more complex layer to Theon and having to hide information from Ramsay. Or maybe he even has to kill people who suspect her identity is fake to protect her. I admittedly haven't gotten to this point yet in the books, but it already makes significantly more sense than what David and Dan chose to do. I feel like the main reason why David and Dan chose to put Sansa Stark in her place is because they thought it would make the subplot more dramatic, which I would disagree because we still have Theon as a point of view character within Winterfell, and like the show, this could be the event that causes Theon to defect and save Jean from Ramsay's torture. There's a much more complex plot with Mance Rayder going to Winterfell to save Jean in the books, but we physically wouldn't be able to do that since Mance is dead in the show. And I don't think it would be necessary, and Theon could come up with a smart plan to get Jean out. Overall, this would be more logical from Littlefinger's perspective because he both gets to keep Sansa to himself and loyal to him, while also making an ally with the Boltons. That and his plan of going to Cersei and getting her to attack whoever the victor is wouldn't compromise Sansa because it would be Jean instead, assuming he still wanted to do that. This seems like such a low-hanging fruit of a fix that it just makes me think that David and Dan didn't really care about overall logic and only wanted to raise the drama by turning Jean into Sansa. They severely misunderstood Littlefinger as a character because even George R. R. Martin said that Littlefinger would never betray Sansa. And the sad thing is, if it wasn't for Bran, Sansa probably would have been manipulated into killing Arya like a dumbass, which just seems so crazy to me that she still listens to Littlefinger in season 7. So that would be an easy fix to the biggest problem in season 5, and I would also propose a change in which the conflict within the Eyrie, where the lords don't trust Littlefinger, to not be resolved so quickly. I think it would be more interesting to have at least 1 or 2 lords in the Vale to not trust Sansa's testimony. Or maybe there's a small hole in Sansa's testimony that one of the lords notices and investigates further. Because currently in the Vale, there's no conflict for Littlefinger to overcome after this trial. Instead, I feel like it would be a more engaging narrative if Littlefinger had to covertly deal with one of these lords and kill them, essentially utilizing his primary way of overcoming conflict of scheming and conspiracy. This could pad out some time within season 5 and 6 because besides the Winterfell plots, Littlefinger has nothing to do. He literally vanishes from the narrative. Littlefinger is clearly making enemies in the Vale, like him flat out threatening to kill Lord Royce. You could easily develop a plot thread from there, in which Lord Royce tries to exact revenge on Peter through his own plan. But maybe Peter makes short work of Lord Royce because he's inexperienced at playing dirty, and coming up with a plot to get Littlefinger killed. Instead, Royce kind of just rolls over and easily submits to Littlefinger when I feel like this type of character would try to rebel out of pure spite for Littlefinger's dirtiness and dishonorable nature. This again would give Littlefinger something to do in season 6 because now that he wouldn't have alienated Sansa, there will have to be new material for the character. And I'm not sure if the books really cover this far for him, so this would essentially be going into unknown territory for his character that wouldn't be derived from source material. Because I obviously wouldn't even try to fix his season 7 plot, and would rather that be removed entirely. This is essentially going into the second part of fixing his character and proposing a different direction and resolution for Littlefinger. I'd argue that Littlefinger is the most important villain in the entire show because he's the mastermind of everything. So having him still be relevant in a major way, I think would be important for his character and would be faithful to him, instead of utterly downgrading him to being a Sansa simp and kissing her toes all the time. I think a longer term goal for Littlefinger that reshapes the show would be more interesting, while also being more in character for him. For this pitch, since I want Littlefinger to make a great impact like the earlier seasons, that means I need to alter the final seasons of the show. So for season 7, I'm going to solely focus the narrative on Dany's war with Cersei, and then season 8 primarily dealing with the Night King and the Mad Queen arc. Or there could even be a season 9 where we split the Night King and the Mad Queen arc, but it doesn't need to be that detailed. My pitch would be, after dealing with Lord Royce and making sure his grasp on the Vale is fully secured, Littlefinger starts conspiring against Cersei, in the hopes that by betraying her, Dany will honor his loyalty by granting him more power and wealth. Some of the details here could be Littlefinger killing characters in King's Landing, like maybe Qyburn to destabilize the kingdom. That could be a factor as to why the Scorpions were so incompetent in season 8. Qyburn could have been possibly working on designs, and Littlefinger kills him during the process, and Cersei haphazardly implements them even though they weren't finished. That's just an example of something Littlefinger could do that simultaneously solves some problems in season 8. One of the other ones being Qyburn's awkward and strangely funny death scene. Or you could also save Kevin Lannister's character from being killed in the Great Sept Explosion and have Littlefinger kill him in an attempt to weaken the Lannister army. Because when you think of the Sept Explosion, you probably forgot that Kevin was even there from how many other characters' deaths overshadowed his. So there's a lot of opportunities for Littlefinger to cause chaos behind the scenes, and in the process, he could be offering up intel to Cersei to make her not suspect him as being a spy. After Cersei inevitably loses to Daenerys, this leaves both the Mad Queen arc and the Night King conflict, both of which I'd still have Littlefinger playing a major part. So this depends on what should come first narratively, because I feel like the Night King conflict should be the final conflict, but narratively it feels more natural for it to happen before the Mad Queen arc. So I'll do a similar structure of season 8's plot, but obviously different. I won't go into much detail and will only focus on what Littlefinger does. After Cersei's defeat and Littlefinger once again is awarded for his scheming, I would expect Jon Snow or most likely Varys to convince Dany to exile Littlefinger from King's Landing due to his history of being a snake. He is not to be trusted. Naturally, this would upset Littlefinger, and this may be a major departure from where the show went, but I think it would be really interesting if Littlefinger got control of the Horn of Winter. Given that the show actually shows it in season 2, when the Night's Watch was at the Fist of the First Men. If you don't know what the Horn of Winter is, it's rumored that the horn, if blown, will be able to bring down the wall. It technically doesn't come back up again in the show, but maybe Littlefinger hears rumors about it being brought to Castle Black and he hatches a plan to steal it. The way in which he hears about it could possibly be through him eavesdropping on a conversation with Tormund and Jon where they discuss the horn. The wildlings apparently know about it through reputation. It would make sense that finding the horn would be a major goal for Jon, so that no one has the power of destroying the wall and unleashing the Night King. So this would essentially enact a race between these two parties in trying to get to the horn first. In stealing the Horn of Winter, Littlefinger would replace it with a fake, and at the end of an episode, he'll blow the horn. A cool moment could be Jon getting to the horn and then Tormund says that it's a fake, cutting to Littlefinger bringing down the wall. thus unleashing chaos into the realm. This would essentially act as Littlefinger getting revenge on the Lords and King's Landing, and he will probably try to profit in some way from the misery caused by the Night King. I think this thematically stays true to Littlefinger's character because he wants to cripple the realm and benefit off of its misery, which is what he did in the earlier seasons, and it would make sense for this to remain being the case. Along with the fact that Littlefinger would probably be the only one to actually want this chaos to unfold. I think in the books, Euron is also a possibility, but the tame and destroyed rendition of him would not make sense for that to happen in the show. So by making it to where Littlefinger brings down the wall, this would also solve the major issue in Season 7 where Tyrion comes up with the atrocious plan of kidnapping a White. That entire plot was extremely contrived because even if Cersei believed them, she still probably wouldn't help them, which is what happens, and the plot only exists to deliver a dragon to the Night King. However, with my pitch, I think it would be much better to make it a character-motivated decision that doesn't compromise the intellect of a bunch of characters. From this point in the story, I think the most logical path for Littlefinger would be to retreat to the Vale and ride out the storm. To not fully upset the Lords, he might allow some of his troops to help out in the overall fight, but I find it hard to imagine that he'll help out completely. Or maybe he'll lie about his infantry numbers. After the heroes inevitably defeat the Night King, this will now lead us to the Mad Queen arc. Now for this, I think a much cooler development would be for Sansa to still doubt Dany and overall dislike her, but to build up that distrust over the seasons instead of it happening instantly. Then because of this, Sansa goes to Littlefinger to conspire with her in taking down Daenerys. In a way, Sansa and Littlefinger help orchestrate the Mad Queen arc into existence by doing different things like assassinating her closest friends. Maybe they could even convince Arya into doing this and actually utilize her faceless assassin skills. I know Arya in the show also kind of has her suspicions towards Dany, so whoever survives on Dany's side like Missandei or something can make for an easy target. A great scene could be Arya wearing Grey Worm's face and uses it to kill Missandei, which would be taking out two characters with one stone. Then another example to drive Dany mad could be planting evidence and making it seem as if her closest advisors are actually betraying her. Like maybe forging a letter in Varys' name that tells the Lords of Westeros that Jon is a Targaryen. There's a lot of different things that you can do that play into the scheming aspect of the show that can undermine and drive Dany crazy. And from all of this, she begins her descent into madness and overall paranoia. She can't trust her closest advisors anymore, her friends that counseled mercy have been assassinated, and Jon is slowly but surely distancing himself from her. From here, the same events can play out in the show, where Jon eventually kills Dany, and this means that Littlefinger makes it to the end of the show. However, Sansa knows the true evil nature of Littlefinger, and I think a suitable ending would be for her to betray and kill Littlefinger. Similar to the ending of Season 7, but done much better in my opinion. Maybe a stipulation in Littlefinger helping Sansa to drive Dany crazy is that he wants to marry her, which she obviously doesn't want, so she betrays him, essentially ending her arc of becoming better at playing the Game of Thrones and using what Littlefinger taught her against him. I think it would be nice if she comes to this conclusion by herself and wasn't necessarily aided by Bran. Bran could come to Sansa with the information that he brought down the wall, but it makes for building a stronger and more independent character if she wasn't given this information on a golden plate. And I know Bran is kind of a wild card character that with his very existence can curb stomp Littlefinger out of the show. But I really like the evil Bran theory in which he knew what was going to happen, but he let it happen anyways. Bran wanted to become the king and create a prosperous realm, so he allowed all of these terrible things to happen so he could get there, which would be my reasoning for Bran not ratting out Littlefinger right away. He knew Littlefinger would serve his common interest, so he allowed him to live. Unlike the show where Bran steps in because Littlefinger was about to manipulate Sansa into killing Arya. Littlefinger's death won't be a major blunder made on his part that was just insanely dumb, but a betrayal from someone he never expected. Sansa uses the lust that Littlefinger has towards her against him. So yeah, this is a massive rework for Littlefinger's character that I think would be a much more satisfactory than what we got. I know it requires altering the story a bit and how it's formatted, but realistically, if David and Dan still cared about Game of Thrones, then they wouldn't have rushed it with 2 shortened seasons. Like, it's wild to me that they did Cersei's downfall, the Long Night, and the Mad Queen arc in 6 episodes. That's purely insane. And with this change to Littlefinger, it made sense to fix other things that David and Dan also broke, because it would be physically impossible to give Littlefinger a great arc in the current state of the show. Sorry this video ballooned in size, and hopefully my pitch for the character was satisfactory. I'd love to go more in depth about it, but this video would become 40 minutes long probably. Thank you for watching, and my Letterboxd, Patreon, and Discord link are in the description. And if you made it to this point, then you may as well subscribe.